We're moving on with another panel, and I would like to join my panelists here on stage for a very interesting panel, which is a truly international panel. We are combining regulators from 5 jurisdictions. It's Belgium, Cyprus, France, and Malta, as well as Denmark. So this will be very interesting. Our topic is the impact of regulatory changes on safer gambling in Europe and beyond. And of course, there are some changes. And how they are and what they will bring is what we will be discussing in a second. But let me first introduce the panelists shortly, starting with the gentleman to my immediate right, Anders Basbøll. Dr. Anders Basbøll comes from Denmark. He's chief advisor with data and systems of the Danish Gambling Authority. Anders is a theoretical physicist by training and joined the Danish Gambling Authority in 2016. He worked on the reporting criteria for sending live data on especially pari-mutuel betting. He's also worked on responsible gaming for years, including on guidance on the Danish duty of attention concerning gambling patterns. I think this will be your main focus later. It's a very interesting one. I love to discuss this with you. Next, we have, let me check, Luke, correct? Luke Camilleri from Malta, in charge for investigation and player protection with the Maltese Gaming Authority. An island in the neighborhood, we can say, looking the big picture from here. Very experienced, of course, with the gaming regulation as well, as you all know. Long time experience in licensing regime. And Luke, you are with the MGA for past 8 years, and for the past 3 years, you've been leading the player protection department, which consists of 2 separate functions. One is the responsible gaming team, the other one is the player support team. And this forms part of a wider regulatory directory. So it's very interesting. There are some new introductions regarding regulation in Malta. In a minute, we will be learning about this and know more of this. Then I'm happy to welcome from France, Morgane Austruy. Hopefully I pronounced this correctly. Sounds good, thank you. Morgane is the Director of Excessive Gambling Prevention and Gamblers Protection at the French National Gambling Authority, the AGEL. She leads a dedicated team responsible for ensuring that all stakeholders of the industry, casinos, online gaming licensees, and even the monopolists, the monopoly operator, comply with the obligation regarding prevention of excessive gaming and the protection of minors. So welcome again. It's very interesting to learn about it. Then we go local again with Spiros. Spiros represents Cyprus, and Spiros has been working for the National Betting Authority for over 7 years now. He headed the launch of the online betting licensing and the overall overhaul of the current legal framework, and he serves currently as the head of legal of the authority. Last, but definitely not least, very welcome to Steve Mees. I think Mees is the correct pronunciation. That's correct, because it's Belgium, not France, right? Steve has joined the Belgian Gaming Commission as a managing director in November 22. Prior to his position, he's been working as an advisor to the Director General for Customs and Excises at the Belgian Finance Ministry in Brussels, and as an EU customs expert and representative for the European Commission in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Steve has worked previously in the private sector before joining the public sector. He holds a Master of Science in Political Science and lives in Antwerp in Belgium. So that's it for the introduction. We're going to move on now to discuss the topics, and I think because, again, as we are in Cyprus, we start with the Cyprus regulator. If you just be so kind to give us an overview on what's happening in Cyprus and what are new implementations, and some things will be introduced shortly regarding extended regulation.
Yeah, of course. First, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you and my fellow panelists to Cyprus. I hope you enjoy your stay and enjoy the conference.
Thank you, much appreciated.
The latest piece of regulation that we published was back in December. It was the player protection regulations. Our aim with that document was to codify all existing best practices and new ideas in safer gambling, and use that as a baseline for player protection and sustainability in terms of licensees. Some of the highlights of that regulation include mandatory deposit limits, the risk assessment and risk player categorization according to their behavior. We didn't want to be over-prescriptive, so what we did was the only obligation that the operators have is to justify, they have objective criteria of how they categorize the players and be able to prove that to the regulator. Also, they have to base all communication with the player on the player categorization. We introduced mandatory safer gambling training to the staff of the operators, especially those in the land-based area. We also added age verification in the land-based area for anyone that looks under 25. And lastly, we introduced a universal web address ending, which, for example, is abcbet.com.cy/limits. You can automatically go and set your limits. It's good for advertising how to set your limits, of course. And in respect to recent developments, we're pleased to announce that our national self-exclusion platform is going to go live in the next couple of months. We've done our best to do it as future-proof as possible. So it has the capability to include licensees from different regulators, exclude persons with conflict of interest, such as football players in certain leagues, and even in the future exclude vulnerable groups, such as people diagnosed with gambling disorder in the national healthcare system. We also plan to update our code of advertisement. For that reason, we held a public consultation in the summer. This was a product of a general population survey on betting advertisements. And then we had a long discussion and analysis with marketing agencies and our licensees. Some of the provisions of that consultation involved around whether or not to ban the use of popular personalities in advertisements, whether or not to ban outdoor advertisements in cities or villages, whether or not to create an exhaustive list of what can be sponsored or not, and whether charitable donations by licensees can be carried out in their brand name, or maybe they should use a different brand name that doesn't include betting, bet, gamble, all those words, because a lot of charitable donations are made to schools, parks, and so on. And also, we consider whether to propose limitations on bonuses, on their volume and frequency. Also, furthermore, we have developed a new standard, a voluntary 3-tier sustainable gambling standard. It's more abstract from what we are discussing at SEN at the moment, but also its key difference is that it's structured more like an ISO standard. So it has a circular management system that includes gambling harm assessment, SG strategy, objectives, action plans. It forces senior and top management involvement, identification and collaboration with all relative stakeholders, systematic evaluation with performance, reporting, and so on. It's something that we're willing and excited to share with all our fellow regulators. And last but not least, as the chairwoman mentioned in her speech this morning, we're about to submit a new betting law to the Minister of Finance. This law has been long in the making and provides for only 2 types of licenses, B2B and B2C, so it's a departure from the current framework. In terms of safer gambling, this law dictates the appointment of an SGO, safer gambling officer, in a similar way as the AML directives appoint MLRO, and active commitment from leadership, top management, the establishment of objectives, KPIs, and have to report to the wider public.
So the responsible gaming officer is mandatory in the new law? The responsible gaming officer is mandatory.
It's going to be mandatory with the new law.
Right. But thanks for the update. It seems like all these license jurisdictions, apart from any .com regions, are going to bring regulation to the next level, and specifically focusing on everything that has some impact on responsible gaming. We saw this in Malta just over the recent years. There's a lot in motion. Perhaps, Luke, you can show us some insights, share them with us, what the initiatives and the strategies of the MGA stand for.
Thank you, Joerg, and good afternoon, everyone. So first and foremost, our strategy is revolved around the concept of three pillars, actually. So the first one is shared responsibility. So we believe that ensuring a safer gambling environment is not only the responsibility of the B2C operator, but it is also our responsibility as a regulator. It is also the responsibility of players, researchers, health organizations, and also B2B providers and game developers, who I believe they have a crucial role to play and are sometimes, unfortunately, overlooked. The two other pillars, I would say, are sustainability and being a data-driven authority. What do I mean? So I mean that any decision we take, any policy or regulation we publish is backed up by data, information, and if possible by months or years of research and experience. So yes, like any other regulation, ensuring an effective regulatory framework has to be followed by adequate monitoring and oversight. And the way we do this is we implement the risk-based approach. So we have a dedicated responsible gaming team, as you mentioned, and we allocate our resources to higher risk areas and to products and operators who we deem to pose a higher risk. So we conduct full scope examinations, targeted examinations, website checks. So however, having said that, and going back also to our responsibility as a regulator, I believe that this in itself is not enough, and we need to educate the industry stakeholders and to provide guidance to the stakeholders. And the way we do this, first and foremost, we try to, as much as possible, encourage an open and honest dialogue with our operators, meaning that operators are encouraged to approach us, to speak to us about, for example, new systems that they intend to implement or to modify any existing systems. Let us know what is working, what is not. So sharing that experience, even for us to get a better insight of what is the situation out there. And following that, obviously, then we update regulations, we provide guidelines, sort of thing. And we do this quite proactively, actually. So we don't just rely on operators to approach us with these concerns, but we regularly hold what we call familiarization visits. These are basically face-to-face meetings with operators. And through these meetings, we seek to understand the difficulties that they are facing. Perhaps if there are any areas within the regulations that are not clear. So again, to share, it's a platform for both parties to share insights, to share experience, identify what is working, what is not, the areas that need further clarifications. So yes, that is our strategy.
So you're consulting the industry too before regulation is subject to changes, and you're making good experiences. So if you invite stakeholders from the industry, we want to know what you think we should change. Sometimes you may expect you receive a wish list, but I think a good dialogue works, and you probably can confirm that it's a good way to communicate.
Exactly. It's very important for us to, again, being a data-driven, going back to data-driven, it's very important that whenever we make a decision and a policy, it's backed up by data and research and insights into the field.
Right. Morgane, France has a long-time experience in regulation, and it's a typical French regulation. Sometimes it's a bit nationalistic, looking into what you've done in the first years of building up regulation. But what is France, or how is France dealing with responsible gaming all over the years? Your development is massive, I think.
Yeah, thank you. The ING is a young authority. It's only 3 years old. But we can say that we have some first results with our model, who is based on upstream with compliance and downstream with control and sanction. First of all, operators must submit to the ING every year an action plan to prevent problem gambling and to protect minors, which must include, among other things, the description of their process to identify and to support problem gamblers. Operators are also required to send to the ING a document outlining their marketing strategy. ING can decline these plans if the actions are deemed inadequate. But to help operators fulfill their obligations, the ING has developed a proper compliance support system. To this end, the regulator has deployed several tools. To quote the main ones, the ING produced a reference framework for the prevention of excessive gambling and the protection of minors, guidelines and recommendations about advertising and bonuses, and advertising content charters. But these tools were built with the different stakeholders, with the industry, but the professional of health and scientists in France. It's important to mention that. I can say that identify and support problem gamblers are mandatory measures and are fundamentals. And over the past 3 years, ING has been dedicated to disseminating the best practices among its operators. And we want that the different system can include a different level of risk, and that operator can propose measures to support graduated with this kind of level of risk.
Thank you very much. You said the authority, your department is 3 years old. The AGEL is a long-serving regulator, of course. But that means that we can see there is this development, how much it cares to do more for responsible gaming, not just at the side. So you are autark in shaping this sort of responsible gaming regulation, supervision, and dialogue. That's correct.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to improve the dialogue with the different stakeholders and industry. But if we have some results now, we need to go further, because we need to have more results. We talk about effectiveness, and we need to go further to reduce the growth who can be attributed to problem gamblers. In France, that's what we ask to the markets. Online gambling, casinos, land-based casinos, monopolies, it's our goal.
Right. You said you're working on best practices.
Yeah.
Any approach how to assess best practices? Are you in constant consultation with other regulators? Are you doing your own research, evaluations?
Yeah, all of that. And the operators with the plan, we can show the best practice, and with our colleague, of course, with the graph, but not only, and the scientists. But we need to improve our knowledge, because in France we have a study of prevalence, of course, but we need to have more knowledge about the risk of addiction and the particular that we have with some offer, some comportment.
Thank you very much. Anders, you have something special. In Denmark, you have a duty of attention for operators towards gambling patterns. Can you share some guidance on what you are telling operators? What is the obligation? How does it work? What's the meaning behind it?
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here. Yes, we have this obligation for the operators that they must be familiar with the gambling patterns of the players, and to take measures to prevent the player from developing a problematic gambling behavior. That's a rule, and then we have some guidance, and what we say is, there's a broad scope of things you can do, but you must look at different parameters. We suggest you can look at something like winnings and stakes, duration of play, time of day, and something like that. Of course, also the speed of the game. There's a difference between slots and lotteries, as we've talked about earlier today. Then we also say that you must look at several parameters and you must look at interactions. If we go back to the AI talk we had earlier today, for these implicit models, if you use machine learning, then you automatically look at all the parameters at once. But if you use explicit methods, you cannot just set a threshold for this or threshold for that. You must combine it, for instance, by point scores, 3 points for gambling late or 2 points for high stake or whatever, but make some kind of combination. So you look at everything at once, so to speak. And then we say you cannot use demographics at all, gender, sex, and so on, age, and so on. And the reason for that is, first of all, there's a legal point. We don't think it's part of the gambling pattern. But there's also the point, the AI talk talked about the risk of biases, and machine learning will just confirm the bias that you put into it, basically. So if you don't look at the demographics, then you're not biased. And the point is also that if I play in a dangerous way as if I was a young man, or perhaps in a different way as if I was an elderly woman, then I should still be caught. So you can be, you can pay attention to different patterns that are typical for different groups, but you don't have to look at the demographics of the gambler.
I would assume that this needs some technology, and the operator is required to apply this technology. How does it work in practice? Or am I wrong? Is this something which is centralized?
It's not centralized, and there is a very broad scope in the sense that you can do, in theory, you could look through by hand by all your players. I don't think anybody could actually do that, but there's no rule against that. It would be nice, I guess, if there comes off-the-shelf products, but you can do different things. As I said, you can make some kind of point scores and say we give 5 points for this and 2 points for that. But you could also say let's have some experts, our own RG people or psychologists or something to rate some players, and then you make the machine, then you train a machine to make the same conclusions for other players that these experts would have made. And then, of course, it will never be better than the original assertment. So you still need to have good assertments, and then you need to train the machine well to do this. So that is what we do, and we also participate in...
Are there technical guidelines, technical regulations available for the operators they could adopt?
We don't have a kind of a blueprint. We've said these 6 variables, at least these would be good to include, but there's no... we don't say that you should, and also quite often the operators choose to play a lot of emphasis on withdrawals and deposits, which makes a lot of sense in many ways. We say it's not really gambling data as such, so it can be used, but it cannot stand alone. You must also have something like the duration of play or the type of game or that kind of thing.
Finally, you're monitoring player behavior.
Yeah.
Is this a Danish idea? Did you develop this on your own, or is this something which is cross-border?
I think we were among the first with this. We introduced it, and now we are participating in the CEN work that was mentioned earlier today, where we talk about it European-wide to make a standard, and I have the pleasure of working with Morgane on that. And we go into this also to make sure, I think we should be realistic about what it is. There will be no thresholds mandatory, and there will be nothing about how the intervention shall be. So it will not be that if people live up to the standard, then they do everything fine. But it will mean that people who sign up to this cannot say, hey, we never thought about looking at the duration of play, for instance. That there is something that they say we will look into these things.
But you think you can define common grounds? We talked about, in the morning, we talked about how good it would be to have some sort of standardization. We don't have any harmonization across the European Union if it comes to gaming, which is a shame, of course, but that's how it is. But we can try to synchronize or to standardize things. And this could be, or is more the approach you're going. But how do you reach common grounds of understanding by way of communicating with other regulators?
Well, we join forums like this one, of course, and stay in touch. And also, we have a new, if we have some new legislation coming up in Denmark, we can ask other authorities, how do you, we think you have something similar, how do you do that? We just had some help with the French, actually, on some completely different topic.
Will you also ask the operators to bring some input, or is this first of all?
We are in close contact with operators.
Right, right. So what could be realistic goals to be achieved if there is an international standard? Morgane, do you have any guess to make what you think could be the next stage, next step?
Yes, I think it's important to share a common set of indicators and to define these indicators. It's a challenge for all of us, I think.
Yes. We are concentrating on monitoring player behavior, but I think there's also what we discussed today, this topic of advertising, of bans, of restrictions. I think this is something which is not easy to be discussed across Europe because the attitude is so different. Can we expect at some point, in some years maybe, rules to be applied for bonus amounts, for what is allowed in advertising, or is this not on your agenda? It's more technically.
I think it's on all of the jurisdictions, their agenda. Some very severe, other like very moderate, at a moderate level. And I think it's, what I see there, and I think it's also the two keywords were already said by you, Joerg, just a couple of minutes before, is that there is a need for a standardization and harmonization. I think all the regulators, and that's why also the regulators are in a body such as the GREF to discuss about it and to look for the common grounds. Because what we see today is that we have cross-border operators, but national jurisdictions, and that makes it very, very complex. That makes it very legal and lethal at the long end. A lot of court cases. Because, and I can tell you about it in Belgium. I mean, as soon as we put forward some legislation, we have a lot of administrative proceedings going on in the Conseil d'État, in the Constitutional Court, even at the lower court levels, that it is attacked because it's not accepted, and therefore I also plea for co-regulation. Co-regulation, that means to have the dialogue straightforward with the operators as well. It's not giving all eggs to one party, but it is to share and to see whether there is a common ground that is acceptable for everybody. Then there is also a lower level of legal proceedings going on, and I think there is a huge impact that can have in a positive way for both regulators as operators. By the way, I want to make a point here, what I heard earlier this morning. We have to make a difference between regulator and the legislator.
Good point.
Because the legislator is thinking, to my opinion, I'm a civil servant, I'm a loyal civil servant, but sometimes legislators can be very emotional, and they can make very emotional laws or decrees. And then as regulator, of course, we are bound to implement them towards the operators. That's a very important element that we should take into account. And we have to, and that's what we are doing in the Belgian Gaming Commission as well, is to say to the legislator, there is some nuance that you need to bring into your lawmaking, because there are specifics that maybe they are not aware about. And then I think if that is the common playing field, then we can go to a sector where compliance and compliance control can be implemented very effectively. So that, and then I'm talking about the legal sector, of course, that we can say to the legal sector, okay, they have their rules, everybody's playing by the rules, that in terms of control, you can shift more the attention towards the illegal sector. No? And I think those are three observations that I made this morning watching the discussions, is that the standardization, harmonization, we should really break or seize the moment to sit together and to plan how we should do that, that we go for co-regulation or look for what are good best practices for co-regulation, and that, of course, that we move to a more compliance-driven economic environment for the sector.
I think it's a very practical remark to say that the law is passed and litigation starts. How could this change? I guess I understand you the way that you're saying before the law is going to be passed, the legislator should consult with regulators and the industry and see how could we avoid those critical points, those critical requirements in regulation that probably cannot be accepted by the industry. Just to give you an example, I'm from Germany, and we have that situation, hundreds of court cases. With every license granted, the operator has to go to the courts because there are preliminary requirements, conditions, which are not really acceptable. One is, one can question this, of course, but one is, in Germany, you are only allowed to offer bonus for your license, for your registered players, in the amount of €100 per player per year. I mean, this is not competitive. We have still have a black market competition, and they are smiling and laughing, saying, we have one of the bonuses, we can attract players. This is one of these points where you have no chance other than to go and appeal it. Discussing these things before, mindfully, of course, could be a better approach. And so far, I'm very thankful you mentioned this. I think this could be one of the basic rules for communication and for starting changing regulation. The Maltese, the MGA, I learned that they try to find out what works and what doesn't. So assessment, self-assessment of regulation and enforcement and regulation. What does work and what does not work in your view?
So to prevent gambling problems, I still think, from my experience, I still think that the traditional self-help tools, such as the limits, reality checks, self-exclusions, they are still very much relevant today and are very effective when applied properly, either by the player or when they are imposed by the licensee. However, the reality is that some players suffering from gambling harm wouldn't even considering using such tools. So it could be they are not aware of such tools or it's their decision, you know. So one thing we need to do more is to promote players, to promote these tools to players and to educate players on how and when to use such tools. So education is very important. However, you'll still need to cater for that category of people that wouldn't use such tools. And in my opinion, the only way to do this is through behavior monitoring systems and going back also to markers of harm. This is an area that the MGA is focusing a lot on currently, also working with other regulators to establish a set of markers of harm. And yes, we believe that, in fact, earlier this year, we've updated our player protection directive, and amongst other changes, we specified 5 markers of harm that we believe are amongst the most reliable and objective to identify a problem gambling, even when taking into consideration the different gaming products. And these, obviously, there are more. The 5 we specified, we started with these 5 are the frequency and increase of deposits and the gameplay, cancelled withdrawal request, multiple payment methods, the use of responsible gaming tools. So what we're referring here are a player setting a limit and making it less stringent, making it more, so that type of behavior, and also communication-based indicators. So regular requests for bonuses, the tone of interacting with the licensee. So those are the 5 markers of harm that we expect licensees to at a minimum implement into their systems, their automated behavior monitoring systems. Obviously, there are more, and we intend to publish further guidelines in this regard. The difficulty with it is that, going back to thresholds, it's very difficult to determine a threshold because the threshold would be specific to each player. So it's difficult to say that when there are 4 cancelled withdrawals, it's a definite sign of gambling harm. So in this area, that's where we encourage the use of AI technology and the machine learning technology, because these systems are able to identify a gambling pattern specific to the player, and then are able to identify deviations from that same pattern. And this itself is a very, very reliable marker of harm.
Leads to a more extensified monitoring of player behavior, and the detection purpose is easier than doing this manually with people, of course. Yes. Spiros, do you have these markers of harm also considered in your new jurisdiction, in your new regulation?
We try to we don't pretend that we know everything. It's a learning curve for us and for the operator, and of course the operator has all the data and the experience, and is more properly equipped to suggest markers of harm, at least. So at the first stage, we decided that we weren't going to be over-prescriptive. We just demanded that the criteria has to be objective and they can justify to us how they work. And on the next day, our next plan is to introduce KPIs so they can show us how effective their communication is. So does their betting behavior change over time with those interventions? Is the categorization correct? Is there room for improvement, and so on? And also, I wanted to add, in the topic of increased harmonization, we must not ignore that increased harmonization will also reward good actors in the gambling industry, because it will reduce regulatory costs. So, something to consider. And also, we would like to see the working group.
Okay,
maybe
thanks.
Making an appearance.
Thanks very much. Right. And is anything you want to add on this sort of how to further develop new technologies? What comes next? Talking about AI to me always means we discuss it next year and something massive will be happened until then, because there is a development. I always like to say 40 years ago, we used computers, we used phones to make phone calls. 10 years later, we used the first sort of smartphones, and today we're using everything everywhere at the same time, and there's an email coming in every minute, and you can send photographs. So there is things you cannot predict. But what is your prediction of the impossible?
Yeah, given the topic of the talk here, I would just like to add that here by October 1st, so this is really brand new stuff, we register also all land-based gambling. That used to be able to be anonymized if it was betting. Now it will be registered to single player, and that means the duty of attention I talked about before will be also covering land-based betting, as will the self-exclusion scheme we have, where you can register with us and then you're blocked from all operators at once. As for the technology, I think it's very important. One thing is to notice the player. For us, it's very important to say also that when you get hold of the player, try to communicate with the player, it's very important that the player can see that it's due to their gambling patterns that they have been found. It's not so much whether it's machine-generated, the message, but it's that it is on target, that we are worried because this and that, so they don't think we got a message because they probably send that to all the gamblers. No, it's because we are worried about you, because the way you play. And that can also be maybe written by a machine or work with a machine or something like that. I think there will be a lot of AI use in all this industry, I'm sure.
I think so too. I received a question, many thanks for that. Probably someone of you can help me. Question is, ANJ often says it does a lot of research. Where can we access the research? Any idea?
That must be for the ANJ.
In France, we don't have many studies, many French studies, because it's a new phenomenon and a new obligation for our public association, who is in charge of. So I know there is a lot of studies, in worldwide, but in France we need to have more studies, and we want to collaborate with research and to open our data, but we need to have to be allowed to. So it's a proposal to have this evolution in the law, and then we want that the industry can share his data and collaborate with the research to evaluate the effectiveness of the different measures and to make some experience new measure, maybe to innovate. It's the point. And in France, we need to have, but I think that it's the case in all of the countries. We need to have more money to grant
these budgets for
yeah,
research.
Absolutely.
Right. And it will not be frequently published, so I think that was the question. But maybe it's a good suggestion to make these things available in public, and then it could be the basis of a new discussion. Just finally, because I think there are no questions, because you touched this topic, communication regulator, legislator stuff, how do you think, Steve, will an impactful regulator look like?
Well, as a commission, I'm end of this month 1 year in function in this new wonderful job, wonderful world, this very interesting ecosystem of gaming. And I agree that we should call it gaming. Gambling makes it a little bit more untrustworthy.
The connotation, yes.
Let's keep it. That's why also we are the Belgian Gaming Commission. It's an interesting ecosystem. I see that operators, they are willing to open up to us. We are, by the way, we are visiting regularly the biggest operators to go and visit them inside, and they show openness to their data, etc. So they're willing to cooperate. So that's building trust. That's important for the compliance element. And I think important for a regulator is to be also an independent and autonomous operator. What I see in this 1 year in function, that this is not always the case. Of course, we have a powerful weapon for that. That's our annual report. But that doesn't serve if it falls on a cold stone, like we say in Flemish. That the message is not transferred to those who are reading the report, the legislator, for example, the ministers, etc. So there we have to really make the point or break the point for we have the knowledge, the expertise, we can bring the nuance, we are in touch with this ecosystem, we can convey from top down, bottom up the messages, and to mitigate into legislation that is where there is eating and drinking for everybody in it, and that could, how do you say, lower down the court proceedings, maybe less job for the lawyers, unfortunately.
That's enough to do for us.
But I think that's one of our main key points at the moment, and that's what we are also working day to day to be an autonomous and independent organization or regulator. Yeah.
Just be in the middle, like a spider in the net. Thank you very much. With that, I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists for a wonderful contribution. Thank you very much.